Chapter 12: The Source of Moral Inspiration. Before embarking on the discussion tonight, let us quote some traditions which are complementary to and conform the traditions quoted last meeting so as to know the spirit behind the Islamic moral precepts, and in particular, to know how far the issue of the sense of honor and respect is given attention in Islamic texts. There is the following tradition in Tuhaful Uqul, page 279, from Imam Sajjad, peace be with him, who says, "Asking help from the people disgraces and debases life. It removes modesty and shame. It diminishes dignity and soberness. It is nothing but poverty. The less a person asks help from the people, the more he becomes rich and needless." That is, poverty does not only mean lack of money. Poverty means neediness. The lack of money means neediness and poverty. The expression of these needs is exactly poverty. The point of the tradition is that poverty and richness are not limited to monetary poverty and affluence. One must be aware that there is another form of poverty and affluence, and he must not commit the mistake of being afflicted with a different form of poverty while trying to remove monetary poverty. He must consider immaterial affluence as more valuable than monetary affluence. There is a saying in Nahjul Balagha, or the Peak of Eloquence, which states, "It is good for the rich to show humility before the poor, to seek reward from Allah. But better than that is the haughtiness of the poor toward the rich, with trust in Allah." Here, the issue which is described by the word T is a concept which is approximately synonymous with self-glorification, tafakhur, or pride, takabbur. But of course, the motive behind takabbur is not in that sense. It means self-preservation, and not to be humble to another person on account of his wealth and riches, rather to be haughty. That is, the other person's wealth does not make him humble. That which is better and more elegant than humility of the rich is the heedlessness of the poor toward the rich through reliance and trust in Allah. Again, here, Imam Ali, peace be with him, wanted to awaken a sort of self-respect, self-nobility, and self-respect. The Imam, peace be with him, also said in Nahjul Balagha, "Miserliness is shame, cowardice is a defect. Poverty disables an intelligent man from arguing his case, and a destitute person is a stranger in his hometown. Incapability is a catastrophe. Endurance is bravery. Abstinence is riches. Self-restraint is a shield against sin. Miserliness and withholding, cowardice, faqr, in the sense of indigence, and incapability are rejected for reasons we shall explain, while patience, asceticism, and continence are affirmed for other reasons. The reasons for the rejection of the former and the affirmation of the latter all revolve around the axis of man's sense of respect and nobility for himself. Miserliness is a source of shame in the sense that whoever dislikes shame should not be affiliated or afflicted with miserliness. It does not say that one must act against selfishness and endure more shame and humiliation so as to further suppress the self. Rather, it says the opposite. Cowardice is a defect for man. It means that one must not possess this defect, deficiency, and blemish. Poverty and destitution make an intelligent person dumb in his reasoning. That is, even if a poor or indigent person is eloquent in speech, he is restrained in relation to anything he needs. So, poverty is bad as it belittles a person. A destitute person is a stranger in his hometown. Deficiency and incapability is a blemish and not perfection for man. On the contrary, patience is the source of one's valor. Self-control is a source of power and strength. Asceticism is wealth. That is, it is a kind of wealth. It is asceticism which makes a person needless of others. What is the reason that a person likes wealth? It is for the self-sufficiency. The observance of asceticism develops a kind of self-sufficiency in a person. Self-restraint is a shield against sin. This tradition is among those traditions we have quoted under the subject of honor. We have quoted other traditions under the subject of preciousness, nafasa. It is narrated in the tradition that Imam Sajjad was asked, "Who is the best of people?" He replied, "It is he who regards the entire world as equal to his self." It means that he has a sense of honor and nobility, such that if the entire world were placed on one side of the scale and his sense of honor and nobility on the other, he would not exchange his dignity for the entire world. We have quoted traditions under the subject of dignity. For example, a tradition by Hazrat Sajjad, peace be with him, recorded in Tuhuful Aqul, states, "Whoever maintains his own respect in view, the world appears light to him." In relation to what he has, man usually gives no importance to what he does not have and is of lesser value. If he does not have anything, everything cannot be unimportant for him. But if he has something more important and valuable, whatever he does not possess is not important for him. The tradition wants to convey that if a person is aware of the value of self-respect, the entire world appears trivial and mean to him. In Nahjul Balagha, Sermon 85, there are again two sentences that highlight this issue of honor and dignity. That honesty is a source of honor and dignity for man, and lying is a source of degradation and failure. A truthful person is on the height of salvation and dignity, while the liar is on the edge of ignominy and degradation. In the Quran itself, we have two verses which completely explain the issue. In Surah Qalam, Surah 68, verses 10 to 11, God says, "And do not obey any vile swearer, scandalmonger, talebearer." The emphasis is on meanness and malice. In fact, perhaps it implies that vile swearing stems from meanness. Anyone who has inner sense of honor does not swear much to support his claim. That is why false swearing is unlawful or haram, while even true swearing is abominable, makruh. What is more categorical in this Quranic verse in Surah Isra, Surah 17, verse 70, is that God states, "Certainly we have honored the children of Adam and carried him over land and sea and provided them with all the good things and given them an advantage over many of those we have created with a complete preference." There are two types of honoring. One is when a person honors another person. This can be traced back to something contractual and conventional. For example, if you enter my house, I can treat you in two ways. One way is not to give you much attention. Another way is to entertain you with all humility and enthusiasm. But when God says, "We have honored," it is obvious that this does not mean that in a meeting we have with man, we have honored him and introduced him to other creatures. Rather, it means that we have honored him in creation. That is, we have endowed this honor in his creation. In essence, honor, nobility, and dignity are an integral part of man's disposition. As such, if man discovers what he really is, he will also discover his honor and dignity. These points are meant to confirm what we have raised during the last session: the physical and spiritual pleasures. As a complementary to the discussion, I have to state that there has long been a question about man, for example, about what is called matter, madda, and concept, ma'na. These things are classified as material, maddi, and conceptual ma'nawi. At present, by ma'nawi, we do not mean the immaterial or metaphysical entities, such as God, angels, and the like. In the context of man's life in this world, there are two sets of entities: material entities and conceptual entities. One of the differences between man and the animal lies in the fact that in the context of man's life, there are things which are not tangible or perceptible, having no body and mass, yet they exist, such as the things which were mentioned. These questions, or this question in particular, has been always asked by man, and that question is, what is freedom? The following is poetry which states, "Money is not supposed to be taken from the palm of the free, neither patience from the lover's heart, nor water from the sieve." What is valuable and important for man is not limited to material and physical things, tangible things, things that have bodies and weight, or what can be grasped physically. Water and bread are valuable for him, but there are other valuable things such as freedom, social freedom, and religious freedom. Religious freedom has a distinct value for him. I can choose whatever belief I like, and I'm free to believe whatever I want. It means that no one is supposed to disturb me on account of my belief. The classical scholars also referred to these things as spiritual matters. Man is delighted to achieve his material objectives. He is equally delighted to achieve his immaterial objectives. Likewise, human suffering is of two types: material and immaterial. That is, the failure to material and immaterial objectives, or to acquire their opposite. There is also this interpretation in psychology in which there is a discussion about physical and spiritual pleasures as well as physical and spiritual sufferings and displeasures. And they are distinguished from one another. For example, physical pleasures are limb-based. That is, they depend on a specific bodily limb. Also, they are connected to an external physical factor. It means that they are generated by means of interaction or contact with an external element. An example of which is the pleasure of eating, which initially depends on a physical limb. That is, man senses it in a certain physical limb, such as in his faculty of taste or touch. Moreover, there must be something on his tongue in order to generate this interaction and experience of pleasure. Concerning spiritual pleasures, meanwhile, first of all, they do not depend on a physical limb. It is impossible. It is impossible to say that a certain part of the body is the locus of these spiritual pleasures. Secondly, it is not necessary that an external factor has contact with man. On many occasions, a thought gives pleasure to a person, like the honorary pleasure it gives to the winner of a contest. Let us assume that someone is recognized as the best artist or writer and is informed about being honored and recognized in a certain place. Because of this, that person feels an inner pleasure. It must not be said that this has also an external factor which was heard. This hearing is her means of information. The pleasure is not that of hearing as in listening to music. Where is this pleasure? Is it in the sense of sight? Is it in the sense of hearing? Is it in the sense of taste? The answer is no. The person feels total pleasure without being able to point to a certain part of the body, or at least to be able to feel at present that such and such part of the body is the one that experiences pleasure. At any rate, material and immaterial things are an issue for man. Philosophers believe that pleasures are of three types: 1. Physical pleasures, 2. Intellectual pleasures, and 3. Intermediary or imaginary pleasures. The third type is inferior to the second type. One must be in pursuit of intellectual and not imaginary pleasures. Thus, in their moral precepts, physical pleasures are somehow condemned in the sense that they are encouraged. But definitely, imaginary pleasures are not a form of physical or sensory pleasures. The root of value. Another question is raised here. Man likes these things and is attached to them, so he must give value to them. Value, quote unquote, is what we usually called price or cost. When does value come from, and why does a thing have a value? If a thing is useful in a way and has an assigned purpose as well as excellence and power for a certain degree of his being, and on the other hand, it is not free in the sense that it cannot easily be possessed and monopolized, then value is brought into being. The air has no value. Why? It is because in the first place, it is free in the sense that it is sufficient for everyone to use, and secondly, it cannot be owned and monopolized. But the case of land is something else. Some people allocate certain lands for themselves and deprive others of the same. Here, value comes into being. Knowledge of the self as the root of moral inspirations. Spiritual matters acquire value in the same way. The assumption is that for the same reason that man is instinctively attracted toward material things, he is instinctively also attracted to spiritual matters. This is the reason why we assign value, spiritual value, to spiritual matters. The question of humanity is raised for the reason that spiritual values are exclusively for man, but the case of material values is not the same. The sense of humanity of every person is measured in a way that human values must be strong in him, and as he is more bound by these values, we consider him more perfect in humanity. Our classical scholars who had approached this issue in this manner discussed it on the basis of a set of fundamental principles, and naturally they did not experience a deadlock. Presently, however, the Europeans have approached the issue in another way, and thus they have come to a deadlock. Both they and humanity have come to a deadlock. They have come forward and differentiated material things from spiritual matters, as well as profit from value. They have argued that there are things which are profits or gains for a person, while other things are not profits for him, but he assigns values to them. The former are material things. The latter are not gains as the former are, but man assigns value to them. Why? How come that a thing which has nothing to do with the reality of man's existence and his perfection, and which he does not naturally seek, is valuable to him? I seek anything which is profitable for me, but there is something which has basically nothing to do with my material welfare, success, and perfection. So why do I assign value to it? Moreover, it is considered a human perfection for me and others come forward and appreciate it. This is hypothetical, imaginary, and a nominal case. The reason is that they do not want to distinguish between matter, madda, and concept, ma'na. In other words, they do not want to assign a concept to a matter, and they do not want to assign any meaning to man's reality. And to say that a person has a stomach as well as something beyond the stomach, and he values whatever is needed, his stomach, just as he values whatever is needed by that which is beyond his stomach. They do not want to believe in a power beyond the physical. They have observed that apparently there is no state of being for man other than the physical. They have taken into consideration whatever is useful for his physical condition, but to desire whatever is not useful for his physical condition is considered illogical. Then they have acknowledged that man gives value to certain things. Now, what is the root of this value? There is no answer. Some have come forward and said, we give value to our work. We ourselves create value. Is value conventional that can be created? What we can formulate are contracts and conventions. Is it a conventional matter in that we assign value to anything for no reason? Both value and profit are in the same category in the sense that they are the same in one aspect. Both of them have something to do the reality of man. It means that he seeks his own welfare and perfection, and he has no other option. However, man is not limited to the physical dimension. Material welfare is valuable for him for a reason, and so is spiritual welfare for another reason. Instead of saying gain, profit, and value, we say matter and concept, or material and immaterial value. And what is logical is this. Today's world is called the world of the undermining of values because they want to strike at the foundation of values, and at the same time they want to offer value to humanity. And this is a contradiction. They strike at the foundation of values through their brand of anthropology. When they look at man through the Marxist lens and regard him as having the physical dimension only, morality, spiritual values, human nobility, and humanity are all meaningless. When man is at most a material entity, more complex than other physical entities, what then is the meaning of nobility? It is said that the Apollo has 5 million particles which are put together. It is not comparable to a small chair which consists of nothing but 4 arms. Yet, do you render any nobility or respect to the Apollo just as you render value or respect to a human being? No. According to them, the human being is not different from other matters. He is just more complex. If we treat man as a grand machine, even if this machine is as big as the world, still it is bereft of human value. It has no human value. As such, they have rendered a blow at the foundation of the things which they have called values, or what we have termed spirituality. We do not distinguish between madda and ma'na. Neither do we say that it is illogical for a person to desire something. What we say instead is that to desire both of them has its own logic. It is impossible for a person to seek a thing without any reason. Self-cognition as the root of moral inspirations. Now, as this subject is tackled, we will understand better the philosophy behind something which is much emphasized in Islam. We observe that whenever they want man to draw toward excellent morality, or what is called today as high human values, they draw his attention to a sort of introspection and say, introspectively discover yourself, your rational self, or the essence of your being. Then you will feel that you find out your own nobility. When a person is drawn toward his inner essence, when he sees himself, he will feel his own nobility and dignity. He is no longer in need of a formal lesson to know it. He acquires inspiration right there. It means that he will feel that meanness or baseness is incompatible with this lofty essence. Feigning, lying, and hypocrisy are repugnant to that essence. Debauchery is inconsistent with it. As such, man could acquire moral inspiration through self-cognition. And this moral inspiration is definitely things not taught by any human being. Rather, this cognizance of this self alone is enough to command a person to do or not to do a thing. That is the meaning of this Qur'anic verse, which states, "By the soul and him who fashioned it, and inspired it with discernment between its virtues and vices, one who purifies it is fallacious, and one who betrays it fails." Mental torture and pleasure. The meaning of conscience and its inspiration can be completely understood here. Self-admonition and attention to the self. By giving attention to the self, the discernment of what is compatible or suitable to the human essence, or kernel, and what is incompatible or unsuitable to it, or this state called mental torture, more or less exists in all people. So, what is mental torture? What is mental pleasure? When a person engages in a certain work, he is really pleased in the depth of his being and feels a sense of fulfillment. And when he performs a set of contrary works, he is so displeased in the depth of his conscience, and one of his faculties is so annoyed, disturbed, agitated, that this state is worse than physical imprisonment. So many criminals confess that they deserve capital punishment. What is this feeling in a person that he could not endure himself? Most criminals are like that. We read in the account of Karbala that many were regretful and had nightmares. One of them hanged himself on the curtain of the Kaaba and said, "O God, forgive me, although I know you will not forgive me." Was it something else other than conscience? The Hiroshima pilot ended up in mental hospital. This sense of guilt and God-weariness stem from the same discernment of the human essence. This can only be explained by a metaphysical philosophy which holds that man is not confined to his physical dimension. Also, the issue of humanity can only be understood and make sense through this way of thinking. In the collection of articles, Zaniruz, Today's Woman, I wrote in a detailed article that on one hand, the Western world totally strips man of values and regards him nothing but as a machine. On the other hand, they talk about human rights and the inherent dignity of man. So ridiculous is this line in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where it states, "Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world." What is this inherent dignity? The human being you have presented has no difference with the automobile I ride on, except that the former is more complex than the latter. So, inherent dignity has no meaning whether in me or in you. I am a machine and you are another machine. Basically, man has no difference with non-humans. All are mere machines. In the book, My Religion, Gandhi has a very beautiful statement in this regard. Thus, it is this philosophy which, in addition to showing the axis or foundation of Islamic morality, or at least a pillar of Islamic morality, guides us to this morality anchored in logic that can explain all the things known today as moral value. And in today's philosophies, moral values are devoid, nay stripped of a foundation. The undermining of values in the West. I remember that in a lecture, we quoted a passage from the book Nik Niyazi by Muhandis Bazargan, who in turn quoted it from an article by Daryush Ashuri, published in Jahanino. And it states, "It was so good, and in almost all spheres, the Western world did something to undermine and uproot all human values. Now, after yielding the fruits of its work, it wanted to revise those values in another form, but it was too late." Then it quotes sayings of Sartre and the like, citing their essence of humanity, and it asserts that Sartre and Heidegger have created a superstition, and in reality, this superstition serves as their God. They have assumed that man has a collective existence distinct from his individual existence, and apart from individuals, there is another thing called humanity, which continuously evolves and always exists. As the theists say that one must work for the sake of God, they say that one must work for the sake of their imaginary God, for example, humanity. They believe in a real existence of this imaginary God and in a conventional existence for themselves. They also regard the individual as nothing compared to this God. It is on account of this impasse that they have coined ideas regarding spiritual matters, or what they call human values. They have rejected religion from the outset, as well as ethics and education based upon religion on the basis of a simple assumption that religion is based on the fear of hell and desire for heaven, and thus we must dismiss anything which we do not believe in. They did not recognize any other function of religion, and now, accordingly, the value of religion is for it to revive the criteria and basis of value in man. Religion requires morality, not only through heaven and hell, rather in the belief system of man. It revives certain elements of humanity. It revives man's humanity in a specific way through which all human values, which are truly and practically meaningless nowadays, acquire logical and precise meaning. End of chapter 12.